Those Americans who came before us fought in America's many wars. Many Americans sacrificed their lives for our freedom guaranteed by a most remarkable document, our Constitution of the United States.
Someone that's going to see it is going to see that you and I didn't go over this 16 times before you filmed it. Do you know what I mean? I'm not an actor. This is not a cut and dried, every word perfect, emotions. You know what I mean? Anybody that sees this says, geez, the guy got upset, you know, or the guy was serious, or he felt strongly about that. That's what I think. That's what I would suppose would come across, right?
Sometimes when doing a film, you just get lucky, like capturing Ken Neff off camera. His passionate comments are the essence of this film. No actors, no script, just 6 World War II veterans and a young lady, age 7, who watched her 300-year inheritance disappear in a single afternoon and suffered through a brutal war. Unrelated events took me to Mooresville, North Carolina. This is where I filmed my documentary. Most of my pre-production work was done at the Mooresville Public Library. While there, I did a small poll. I asked about 20 people ages from 14 to 25 if they were familiar with the phrase, the greatest generation. To my surprise, none knew of the phrase, the greatest generation. This small poll prompted me to go to Lake Norman High School in Mooresville. It's an upscale high school. I prevailed upon a principal to allow me to poll his 11th and 12th grade history students. Out of 124 history students, not one knew of the phrase, the greatest generation. Then I got lucky again, because one student asked, well, who was the greatest generation and what did they do that made them the greatest generation? I replied, I'm glad you asked me that. They're about my age. And to begin with, we survived the Great Depression. The Great Depression that started on Black Tuesday, October 6th, 1929, when the stock market crashed, losing 40% of its equity in one day. 9,000 banks closed. 9 million Americans lost their savings. 16 million Americans lost their jobs, which is 25% of the workforce. Over 270,000 families lost their homes through foreclosure. 1 million farmers lost their farms. 2 million Americans migrated around the country looking for work. Huge dust storms devastated the breadbasket of the United States. Millions of Americans waited in line at the free soup kitchens, hoping for a bowl of soup and a piece of bread. More often than not, the soup and bread ran out before they were fed. World War I veterans marched on Washington, asking for their World War I Veterans Bonus, which had never been paid. They were denied at gunpoint. While people were starving, dairy farmers were dumping their milk on the ground because it cost more money to take the milk to market than they could get paid for their milk. Newly elected Franklin Delano Roosevelt closed the banks and created a bank holiday and took America off the gold standard, trying to stabilize the banks. His administration called the New Deal, put people to work building roads, bridges, dams, under government agencies like PWA and WPA and the CCCs. President Roosevelt said, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And James J. Braddock, boxer, came off the soup lines to defeat Max Baer for the heavyweight championship of the world. He inspired a downtrodden nation. On September 1st, 1939, Hitler invaded Poland. France and England declared war on Germany. On December 7th, 1941, without notice or provocation, Japan attacked the United States, bombing Pearl Harbor, killing 5,000 American military and civilians, and devastating the Pacific Fleet. We went to war. We became a part of a killing machine that killed 72 million people during World War II. 16 million men and women joined the military. For the first time, women went to work full time. They built the implements of war, planes, tanks, ships, bombers. It's true that women got the right to vote around 1920, but women were still considered property by men. It was the work that these women did in these defense plans that truly emancipated women. Everyone in the country contributed to the war effort. Famous personalities and movie stars helped sell hundreds of millions of dollars of war bonds. On May 8, 1945, known as VE Day, Victory Europe, Germany surrendered. On August 6, 1945, the United States dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, killing 140,000 Japanese. The second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. Japan surrendered officially on September 2nd, 1945. We came home and we built the greatest economy the world had ever known. We helped rebuild the war-torn countries with our tax dollars and our ingenuity. And incidentally, beyond a token, we were never paid back for that. We also probably saved 100 million lives from starvation. We fed most of the world.
Hello, my name is Len McCutcheon. I was born into this world on July the 29th, 1918. I was inducted into the Army in August of 1941, whence I came out of Officers Training School as a second lieutenant. We went into the Pacific area on different islands of of Guam, Saipan. 1945, we got our orders to move into the island of Okinawa for the initial invasion, which for the first 3 days there was very little resistance. But that didn't last very long. Eventually it became a problem not only from the enemy but also from the weather. I guess we were there during the rainy season, and the island of Okinawa initially was a sea of mud. I was given command of another company. I was promoted from first lieutenant to captain, and we proceeded with our entry on into the island of Okinawa, and increasingly got heavy fire from the caves. The Japs were holed up in most of these caves, and they were heavily fortified. But anyway, on one occasion, we had one cave that had us pretty well tied down. We couldn't move. So I selected one of my sergeants to join me in a little venture to sneak up on the cave or caves in the middle of the night and blast them with flamethrowers. We left our area approximately at midnight, armed with 2 flamethrowers and our sidearms. We knew we could walk a portion of the way to get near to the caves, but then in the latter part we had to crawl, and we had to crawl, I would say, at least 500 yards under some extreme conditions of mud, any kind of animal you want to describe. If it wasn't there, we thought it was there. But we got up to a point where we could see this one cave, and then we noticed that this cave was back in a cove. We noticed there were 2 other entrances of caves. So at daybreak, we broke out our flamethrowers and hastily fired on all 3 cave entrances. And of course, it's not the flame itself that kills the enemy, but it's the lack of oxygen that the flames engulf when they're fired. Well, after doing a good job of blasting these cave entrances, we hastily retreated, crawling part way, tried to avoid detection, and then back to where the company was located. And we did not hear any more mortar fire from that particular area. I was transferred back to 10th Army Headquarters, in which I was assigned to a headquarters company there at that time when the bomb was dropped on the island of Japan. So it was a matter of days and weeks till the Japanese surrendered, and I was looking forward to being released and perhaps get on one of the first ships coming home. But that didn't happen. But I was put in charge of accepting all equipment, wheel and track vehicles from all the companies, Army, Marine, and Navy, on the island of Okinawa, and properly storing them for long-term storage. After about 3 months, we were all released to come back to the States, and we finally got on the slow boat to Seattle, Washington. But during retirement, many years, seen a great change in the world today, and it appears that we thought World War II would end all wars, but since then we've experienced the wars of Korea and Vietnam, and now our local conflict in Iraq. I hope and I trust that the many young people, and particularly our young high school men and women, are preparing themselves for what they may be able to see today. The world's been in conflict for so many years that it is something that they will have to face in the years to come. And I hope we can trust they will not get too imbibed in their iPods and various musical machines that keep coming on the market, some that we never dreamed of back in the years when I was growing up. They can concentrate on the history of the world, the history of our government, and work towards the freedom that we've all fought and lived for our entire careers. I've lived a good long life with the benefits of good health. I've seen a lot, and I wish our oncoming generations that they can do as well as we did in the past 100 years. Thank you. Goodbye.
Len McCutcheon, Colonel Len McCutcheon, was highly regarded by the men under his command. They knew their leader would do everything in his power to bring them home safely. They knew that their leader would never ask them to do what he himself would not do. You heard about how he and his sergeant took out the 3 caves on Okinawa. He was called to headquarters, and to put it in Len's own words, they gave him holy hell. He was reminded that he was a key officer, and key officers save the lives of the men that he commands. He was flatly told never to do anything like that again. He was also awarded the Bronze Star and given many handshakes.
My name is Herb Knox. I was born in Mecklenburg County, North Carolina. My father and mother lived in there for all their lives. I was raised in a Christian home. I was one of 4 children. I had 1 sister and 3 brothers. I was the oldest boy. When I went in service, I had a high school education. That's all I had. And I joined a lot of other guys with no more education than I. I went in the Army at Fort Bragg, stayed there through basic training, and then went to Texas, to Killeen, Texas, Camp Hood, Texas, and there I went into weapons school. And I got a good education as far as weapons are concerned. The time I served, I was in the Army 3 years. I was shipped to ETO, the European Theater of Operation, and was over there 1 year. We were in combat action for 196 days, I believe, continuous, which was pretty much 4 experiences I had, just like about everyone else. Everything was new to me. I didn't do anything outstanding, I don't guess. I didn't get a field promotion. I did get a promotion when I got overseas to Tech Sergeant, T4, and most of my buddies got ratings at that time. One of the strange things that happened to me, I guess, 3 of my buddies were drowned in training. We were crossing low water bridges, it's culverts, and they're concreted over, and the water's over about 1.5 feet, 2 foot. And the guy driving a truck drove too close to the culvert, and that wheel dropped off, of course. The vehicle capsized. And we had 3 guys drowned in that thing that I was real close to. My best friend, my platoon sergeant, and my squad leader. My best friend was private. Platoon sergeant was a book sergeant, the other was a staff sergeant. And the strange thing about that, I was selected out of the company to escort my buddy's body to Lexington, Kentucky, which was tough. 18-year-olds, we don't handle that very well. But we I took the trip and did what I was supposed to do. And I don't know whether I did good or did bad, but I got up there and got the job done and got back home, back to the base anyway. So, and then the first casualty we had overseas was was a lieutenant. This lieutenant was maybe the best guy in the whole outfit. He was a Boy Scout in civilian life, highest ranking could get, and he was a decent guy. He was just mild-mannered, and we all liked him a whole lot. He was a good leader. He didn't have any mean spots in him. We had some guys that cuss you and beat around, but he was a great guy, and we always sorry that we lost him. The next guy we lost was a guy that had pneumonia, and that was sad. That you get over in a war and be shot at, and he died of pneumonia. The next casualty we had went in a house, and there's an old shotgun up on the wall, and the guy picked it out and told his buddy, "So I'm gonna shoot you," and he pulled the trigger, and there's a case of an empty gun killing someone. And then thereafter, while the enemy did their damage to us, we didn't have a whole lot of casualties. Yes, we had a lot of people that were wounded, things like this. But I was in combat 196 days, I believe, which is right many. It was under fire all that time. We were in Europe, and of course in Germany. We went across out of Belgium into Germany. Why, they're pretty hostile, and the people we were fighting were not always SS troopers. A lot of them were the Volkswagen's Army or the People's Army, they called it, and they had young guys in there. I say young, 15, 14 years old maybe. Old men like me, 75 years old, 60 years old, were not very well trained and were not very well equipped. And it's about like shooting ducks on a pond. Of course, they could kill you also, but they were not really aggressive. And while we were there, we went into the little towns, little villages, and early going over there, we go in the village, and the Germans had already run all these people out. They knew we were coming. But then after a while, we were getting on the villages, and there were people there. And we went in one little village over there, and we saw civilians, we call them. And they were scared of us. They were very frightened. And as soon as we'd say something to them or something, they offer them a candy bar or something. Why, that changed their attitude right then. We were not the old mean devils coming over here. We were decent people to them. And they received us very well, most of them. You hit some places and they were very resentful. I don't know if it was resentful to us or resentful to the Germans. They told them that we were the devil and all that stuff. And we were not as bad as the Germans made out or Hitler made out. These people were glad to see us, I think, really, after a few minutes. They received us very well. Some of them shared some of their food with us, which they didn't have much. And we shared some of our food with them, which we were not supposed to do. We were not supposed to fraternize with them. But it's pretty hard not to smile at a young girl or a young boy out there, and they look at you like, well, you are somebody. One of the civilians that we met in one of these little towns, I met in Mooresville, North Carolina. She was 6 or 7 years old probably at that time, and she was right fearful, I think, of us Americans coming in here, but someone gave her a candy bar or smiled at her, and in just a few minutes she was just, she's on our side. And it's right unique that in this age and time that after that war, I'd meet someone that could possibly, I'd met over there 50 years ago, 60, whatever it was. And you're going to get a chance to meet her in a little bit here. Just think you'll be impressed with her. Maybe she'll tell some good things about us. I'd like for them to ask me what I think about world conditions. My answer would be this. I think we're in a hell of a shape. I don't know what we're going to do about it. But I think one thing he can do is read history, study history, because it's going to repeat itself. It does repeat itself about seems like about 50 years or so. Get an education. The war I was in was pretty bad, and it's modern now. You got to be able to use a typewriter. You got to be able to use a computer. You got to be able to have some intelligence so you can punch the right button at the right time. If not, you can push the wrong button, and some of your buddies get destroyed. Education, I think, is very important. I think it's about all I need to say. It's been nice. Thank you so much.
You heard Herb Knox say,
I didn't do anything outstanding, I don't guess.
in reality, Herb Knox was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. That's the second highest honor bestowed upon a combat soldier, outranked only by the Congressional Medal of Honor. To be awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the act of heroism must have been so notable and involve risk of life so extraordinary as to set the individual apart from his comrade. This is what Sergeant Herb Knox did. His tank came under attack by 2 German rifle platoons armed with Panzerfausts. Those are anti-tank missiles. His tank was put on fire. His 4 companions were wounded. Herb came out of the tank because he was a tank driver, and with his sidearm killed several of the advancing Germans. He then got on the machine gun of the tank and routed the rest of those platoons. He then got on his cannon and routed further Germans. He then put out the fire on his tank and gave medical aid to his companions. More remarkably, you heard Herb Knox say,
I was in combat 196 days, I believe, which is right many of me. It was under fire all that time.
in my opinion, when Herb Knox walks into a room, everyone should stand to honor this man. America invited war-ravaged, displaced families to become American citizens and rebuild their lives with the guarantee of the United States Constitution.
I'm Ann Holden. I was born and raised in Europe, and I would like to give you a small glimpse of what it was like to live there during World War II and shortly after. My people are called Donauschwaben. They were a group of Germans who were invited by the Habsburg to settle an area in Yugoslavia about the time of the American Revolution. They turned a wilderness into fertile fields and beautiful vineyards, and we lived there in peace and harmony with the rest of the people. However, in 1944, in the fall, we were told in the middle of the night that we should pack up and leave. The Russian front is coming in and our lives would be in jeopardy. We packed up a few belongings and saddled our horses and wagons and headed toward Germany. There were 10,000 wagons, about 100,000 people on the march. For the next 2 years we were homeless. We ate whatever little we could find. We stayed wherever there was room for us. Sometimes there wasn't any, so we slept in ditches, in fields, or in schools. Finally, we landed up in Germany for our safety reasons, really. We were also targeted on this trip many times by airplanes, and at night we could hear and see the flashing lights in the distance where cities were being bombed. But in 1945, in May, we were rescued by the Americans. We had to hang a white sheet out in the window. We hid in the basement because there was fighting right before that. And when the Americans came, there were 2 soldiers. I came to the door, and we had to line up and march out and line up in front of the house with our hands up. And they were really looking for weapons. Of course, we didn't have any. And they were really kind. They even asked our parents if we had enough food for us children, which really surprised everybody because We had no idea what they were going to do to us. So now the war was over, and the adults thought, why can't we go back home? It wasn't our war to begin with. We were just in between here, so let's see if we can go home. The Americans gave us permission, and the Yugoslavian government gave us permission to do so. So we went by train almost to our hometown until we were stopped. We had no idea that Tito was in control now with his communists, and he started his early ethnic cleansing. And to our luck, we were not allowed to go back home. So for that summer, we lived in boxcars. And again, food was scarce, but somehow we managed. We landed up way up in East Germany because we were in the Russian zone, and you did not leave the Russian zone. At that time, Germany was divided into 4 sectors. And to leave the Russian zone was the hardest one to get out of. So one day we got a letter from my uncle who lived in Munich. And because of his help in some negotiations, eventually, which took a while, we were allowed to go to Munich. That was in 1946. We lived in a refugee camp, and there were a lot of people that came back, of course. And my father found us that way too. He came one night, and it was the happiest day of my life because we were told by some eyewitnesses that he actually died. So to see him standing there was really a big shock. My father looked around and he told my mom, this is not a good place to stay. We're in a refugee camp. This is not a safe country. We need a safe place to live, and America is it. We were lucky at that time because of the American Displaced Persons Act. We were allowed to go if you passed your health and political inspections, which we did. In 1951, in November, we came to America. We came to a family. We were sponsored by a family by the name of Williamson near Van Wert, Ohio, and my dad was employed on their farm. They fixed up an old farmhouse for us, and I remember how beautiful it was. This was the first time in 7 years that we actually had a home of our own, living in a house. I had my own bed, and I had my own bedroom, and enough food to eat that we never had to go hungry again. And I remember how good it felt to be in bed at night, warm and safe, and having had enough food and your tummy did not rumble. So I did not speak a word of English, but we had to learn quickly. We came on a Sunday and I had to go to school on a Monday. So I worked hard, and I remember my first grade card, I showed it to my father, which was all A's and B's, and he looked at it and he said, this is a very good grade card if you did your very best. But if you didn't do your very best, then it's not all that great, and only you know the difference. He also told me that I should get an education or get some kind of profession. He said, whatever is in your head, no one, no man or no government can take away from you. It's yours. So I took his advice. I graduated from Mansfield Senior High School. I graduated from Ohio University and Ashland University. When I was 18, I was proud to be an American. I got my citizenship papers. And I just want to tell you people, especially you young people, how lucky you are that you were born in this country. And you girls, no place else in the world would you have all the opportunities and the freedom that you have here, because remember, in many countries, your future would be determined by your parents or someone else. So honor your country, be proud, and be a proud American. Thank you. Goodbye.
Mr. and Mrs. Hume came to the United States with their daughter Anne in 1951. They learned the English language, studied for the naturalization test, and passed. On her deathbed in 1988, Mrs. Hume said to her daughter, "Who could have believed that we could once again own our own home and be safe? America is God's country."
My name is Richard Keenan. I was born in the oldest summer resort in America, which is Wolfboro, New Hampshire, 1925, November 8th. I came from a farm. I went to school, a one-room school. I was the smartest kid in my class up until the 8th grade, and they put another guy in with me, and I became the dumbest. During the war, my dad went to work down in Portsmouth, New Hampshire in the shipyard, and we moved off the old farm down there, and I went to high school at Portsmouth High and graduated. In those days, they called me Shorty. I was known as Shorty Keenan. From there, at the time during World War II, they had a program which was aviation cadets. And you could sign up for aviation cadets, and they would take you after you were 18 and you would go in the Air Corps. I didn't want to go in the infantry, so I signed up. After that time, when I became 18, I was taken into the Air Corps, sent to Miami Beach for my basic training, and onward from there, along with a bunch of other guys. I washed out of cadets, but they retained me in the Air Corps and sent me to Tyndall Field for gunnery training. After gunnery training, I was sent to Westover Field, given a number and sent to a bench in a building, and then guys came and sat down beside of me, and that became my crew. My crew for heavy bombardment. We were then sent to Charleston for training as a crew, and then we were sent to Mitchell Field to pick up a bomber to take overseas. My pilot happened to draw a very famous bomber, which was the V-12, the 5 Grand 12, which was the 5,000th bomber built by Consolidated and had all the workers' names all over it. It was autographed. It was called the Autograph Bomber. We took that and flew onward, upward, and ultimately to Gander. And I was assigned, or my crew was assigned, to the 782nd Squadron. And I became the ball turret gunner on a crew of 10. From there, we flew missions over Germany, France, bombing bridges, airfields, Hermann Goering tank works. The two most heavily cities in Europe was Berlin and Vienna. And we were assigned to Vienna, as well as many missions to the Polesti oil fields. On one mission to a refinery, Oswiecim up in Poland, we got hit by flak, and after that we couldn't get back to base, so we headed for Russia. About 3 miles over the Russian lines, with the pilot and co-pilot holding the plane and limping along, we got hit by a Russian fighter, which set our plane on fire, and we all were forced to bail out. When we bailed out, we were machine gunned on the way down by the Russian soldiers. I had gotten wounded in the head, luckily, and they picked me up. It took me, and we went off and found one of the guys on the crew, the waist gunner, and then onward we found the radio operator. He had a broken leg, and we picked up the tail gunner who'd been shot through the face. And they took us all to an old farmhouse and kept us there for a whole long time. And they took me and the other guys to the hospital for a while. A little while later, a crew from the 8th Air Force came through, and they put me on that, and I went to Poltava, then down to Tehran, and over to Cairo. And while in Cairo, lo and behold, I met the pilot who had, he said, missed the plane to our base in Italy. However, I found out his wife was in port. She was a nurse, and I suspect he missed it on purpose. So he and I flew back together and ultimately arrived at base. So I knew a pilot who'd lost his whole crew on the first mission, and he hadn't been on that. And I called him and asked him if he was looking for a gunner. He said, yeah. So I got myself transferred into the 780th Squadron, and I flew the rest of my missions with him as a nose gunner, finishing up with 35 sorties or 57 missions. Anyway, I finished up and came back to, and boy, I tell you one thing that was really, I remember it so clearly, seeing the Statue of Liberty when we came in on the Liberty ship that brought us home. After we'd been in the storm for 2 weeks with waves higher than my home, at home, guys got all sick, and it was something. Anyway, we were sent then from there to Scott Field. Now, in the old days, all you needed was points to get out, and all I needed was 2, so they didn't send me to the South Pacific. And we heard, and this is the old story of the rumors, that they were looking for guys to go out west and fight forest fires. And we thought, boy, that'll be a heck of a deal. We'll go out there, we'll volunteer. They'll put us with forest rangers watching the towers, and we can go to town at night and get drunk and chase women. Well, guess what? They formed firefighting battalions of us guys. And we were up in the mountains in Portland and Oregon, in places they couldn't get equipment, fighting fires, and that was doggone nearly worse than the war. I ended up in a hospital with smoke inhalation and everything else. But we were on detached service to the Corps of Engineers, and the time came, the war ended in the Philippines, in the South Pacific, and so they came by to us and they said, well, you boys can all go back to Portland Air Force Base and get discharged, so you can get discharged right here. Well, I waved my hand and said, that's me. And me and a bunch of other guys got discharged from the Corps of Engineers, and I tried to get that changed in later years, and I never could because it was official. So I got discharged from the Corps of Engineers after spending all my combat time in the Air Corps. But that's life. You know, freedom has to be protected in some manner, our freedom. I'm not quite sure that I think that we should be providing it for everybody in the world, but we at least must protect our own freedom. And the guys, most of the younger generation have had a pretty free ride, in my opinion. I see kids with $6,000 and $7,000 toys riding around on the lake where I lived. Think nothing of it. They act like it's supposed to be. Well, it wasn't that way where I came from. One thing from it, my dad never got out of the 8th grade. He could tell you some stories that would curl your hair. And he said to me, you will finish high school and you'll stay there till you're 21 years old. So you better get through it. But he never anticipated I could go on to college. And I could never have done that without the GI Bill. And you know, that brings up a very good subject. I have in my retirement a poster. In the old days, they used to say I resembled Gene Kelly. And I used to get a lot of free drinks telling people I was Gene Kelly's cousin. What, you want to hear an Irish ballad? As I was walking up Liverpool Street, a sassy policeman I chanced for to meet. He gave me some guff and he gave me some jaw, but I showed him how a game played in Erin-go-Bar. Oh, they all flocked around me like a flock of wild geese, saying, catch the damn Paddy, he's killed the police. If there's one man around me, it's 7 times 4, all against poor Erin-go-Bar.
Dick Keenan said, luckily I was wounded in the head. Wherever Dick Keenan went, he brought along his courage, a smile, and a joke. Rarely does a bomber crew survive 50 missions. Dick Keenan survived 57 missions.
My name is Tom Harrell. I was born in 1925 in Pulaski, Virginia. From the earliest times, I wanted to fly. So when I graduated from high school in 1943, I enlisted as an aviation cadet in the U.S. Army Air Corps. One morning in Dallas, Texas, I was asked by the first sergeant and others, "Who here can type?" 4 hands went up. First man said 2025, next said 20, third 20, I said 55. The first sergeant said, "Get your gear and come with me." I was a typist in headquarters, and one day an opportunity presented itself that I could transfer to radio operator school and thereby reach flight status. In order to keep 1 million Japanese soldiers tied down in China, the Air Transport Command was tasked with the supply forces to keep the Chinese military in the field. That required 24/7 flights across the hump, delivering men and materiel to the Chinese. And it had to overcome incredible weather. The monsoon rains from May until September were so heavy that if you extended your hand, sometimes you couldn't see it. Winds as high as 200, 250 miles an hour were recorded, which literally threw our airplanes out of the sky. We lost over 1,000 aircraft from all military sources in the China-Burma-India theater, and we left 1,350 air crewmen on the mountains. They were unable to be rescued because of where their aircraft went down. But on the ground, on the bases where we operated from, we encountered insects of incredible variety and with deadly stings. Same with snakes, from the little 6-inch crate to the big pythons and deadly king cobras. Historians have always underestimated the value of the China-Burma-India theater. Our efforts in the China-Burma-India theater saved untold numbers of American lives. I'm proud of what the American military accomplished in World War II, especially what they accomplished in the China-Burma-India theater. Let me leave you with a thought. When you go home, tell them of us and say, "For their tomorrows, we gave our today."
Tom Harrell, because of his exceptional organizational skills and ability to typewrite 55 words a minute, could have spent the entire war at headquarters amongst high-ranking officers and 5-star hotels. But he wanted to fly, and fly he did. By age 21, he had flown around the world, and he had also flown the dangerous Himalaya mountains.
Hello, I'm Ken Neff. My grandparents were Pennsylvania people. Part of the family came over very early. They came over here with Lafayette. And my mother lived on a farm, raised on a farm in Shippensburg, the land that they received for service with Lafayette in the Revolution. My dad's parents came a little later and settled in Philadelphia. They came from Europe, Germany and Switzerland. So I have a background of people being in this country quite a while. And we always liked that. We always talked about it. We were always proud that I was a part of people that left the problems behind and came to this country because it was the best place in the world to be, even in those days. I, of course, went to school in New York public schools. I felt I had a good public school teaching, business-like, scared to death of the teachers, more scared to death of the principal. Not a lot of fooling around in the public school system that I ever saw. I went to a public high school, DeWitt Clinton, 10,000 boys, 2 sessions a day. But it was all right, and I felt I got a halfway decent general high school education from Clinton. But I have to tell you that in a school that big, you're a very small number. So I was happy to get out of Clinton. And of course, that was about the time that the National Guard was federalized, and we knew that there was going to be a war, or we expected there would. But if anyone talked about it, it was probably more about us going to help Europe than it was to have anything whatsoever to do with the Japanese. That came as a big shock, I believe, to a lot of people in this country. And I went to talk to the Coast Guard. I had a couple friends who had already gone in the Coast Guard. And they said, sure, Ken, I had told them about my background, the things I had done and so forth. I did a lot of mechanical work as a young kid. They said, we'll put you in a machinist mate school because we need machinist mates who have experience with tools and so forth. And they did. And I went to school over in Brooklyn, a diesel school. And got out of that in the upper 10th of the class, and they sent me on to General Motors in Flint, Michigan, who were running a special program for motor machinist mates that would be going on the LSTs. And when we heard that, we had no idea what an LST was, other than someone said, it's going to be a large, slow target, and we all kind of laughed. We were sent to Jeffersonville, Indiana, where they were building LSTs, as well as many other places up on the river system. And we got the LST-71 and took her to war. Our first stop was in Bora Bora, which is down near Tahiti. And the ships all had to run a long course like that at that time of the war because they were frightened of the Jap submarines. The Pacific is a big ocean. We did a lot of running around. We did good. The ship received several awards for action. My experience was the worst at a place called Bougainville and also at Guam. Although the other islands, the smaller islands, there were problems, dive bombers, all that kind of thing, but not to the extent that we had at Bougainville and Guam. They were fairly major invasions. And we were very early on the beach there, and very luckily didn't receive any severe damage, but it would shake us up. But all this time, as I've looked back at it, we were just doing a job. There were several times when we had bad experiences. I mentioned Guam, which was an experience where I'm not going to say the mistakes were made, but there wasn't enough understanding about what the Japanese had on Guam, and they sent us too early. And when I say us, I don't just mean my ship, a dozen ships. And we had Marines on board, and we couldn't keep them on the beach. In other words, it was a tough place. We put them on the beach one morning, and by late afternoon, we suspected they were not going to be able to stay. And late at night, we took them off the beach and left. The Japs were so well embedded and had tunnel system so bad, and were able to have the guns, their guns, all set up for range along their shores, that there was no way that the Marines or anybody else could have stayed on that beach. So although there were some men lost, we got almost all of the men that we had on our ship, at least, off again. And we went to Eniwetok, and we were there a month recovering, and there was a massive assembly of ships of all kinds at Eniwetok. That's a big open Pacific harbor, not a base, but a harbor. And if there was one, there must have been 1,000 ships in that whole Eniwetok basin preparing. And part of them went with us back to Guam, and this time we stayed. And we later found that they had bombed and shelled Guam for that whole month. And that made it possible to keep on the beach. So that was a tough one. We very seldom went anywhere by ourselves, meaning the ship. We very seldom had duty to go someplace all by ourselves. We usually went 2 or 3 or many more ships on a landing. But we got word to go all by ourselves, and we all started to wonder, what's this about? And we sailed overnight and went to a very odd little place in the Green Islands where we waited at night to go in, and we got a signal from the beach, and apparently a small group of Marines had been put on this island a week before to try to locate natives that had been collected around in the Solomons Island by the Japanese and brought to this island to build an airfield. The Japs were more or less gone. The Marines didn't find any but some scattered remains of the Japanese, which we presumed they killed because they weren't there. But in any case, we took about 127 natives off that island. And that was the worst thing that you could imagine, because I'm talking about men, women, and children. Shot, chopped, beaten, starved. Unbelievable punishment. Hardly alive. I think one of them died in our small boat because we got the signal to go into this tight little harbor. And as we did, we put a small boat over the side, and it went to another place where we got a signal. And there were these Marines that had found them, got them together, got them ready for us to take off. We brought them to our ship in a small boat, and we rigged the stretcher system so they could put them in the stretcher at the bottom by the water. We hoisted them up and took them down on a tank deck into cots. A terrible thing to go through, to see human beings in that condition. And I'm talking about young girls and children and the whole thing. And it gave me a really, really bad feeling about the Japanese. We had heard stories, but boy, we were right there on that one. When the time came, after a little over 2 years on the ship, the engineering officer came to me and said, "Ken, we're going to make you chief if you stay, but if you want to go home, you can go home." And of course, you know what option I took. I went home. I think today things are very different. The whole political system around the world is in upheaval for many, many reasons. I read quite a bit. I don't understand an awful lot. I don't know how anybody understands an awful lot today. This country has worked hard. Our people have paid taxes, given money, served in the service around the world to help these other countries. If you think about it, if we hadn't gone into World War II and done the things and provided the men and women and the materials for war, this would be a different world today. Hitler might be sitting in the White House, for heaven's sakes. We don't know. But if it hadn't been for what this country did, we know it would have been very, very different. And when the other countries all went home from the war, we didn't. We stayed where the war was. We had plans and programs from this country for money and facilities and support for the damaged nations. We had plans to help France and Germany and England recover from the war, even Russia. So this country did much more than just help to win the war. We won the peace, too, for a while. How many people over the years, the 300 years, have come to this country to seek freedom? Just think about it.
You heard Ken Neff say, "When I look back on it, we were just doing our job." When it comes to love of country, no man is more sincere than Ken Neff. I would be remiss if I didn't say a few words about my fellow seamen, the men of the Merchant Marine. The men of the Merchant Marine suffered the highest casualty rate, that's the death rate, of any service in World War II. 1 in 26 died. When you compare it with the Navy, of 1 in 132, or the Marines, 1 in 78, you can see the terrible punishment endured by the Merchant Marine. Our convoys that sailed the North Atlantic, the North Sea, and the Arctic Ocean were slow moving. German submarines underwater could outrun the speed of these convoys. When a convoy came under attack, it did not stop. No effort was made to pick up survivors from a ship that went down. The Atlantic Ocean, the North Sea, and the Arctic Ocean created hypothermia. Any man in the water was dead within 5 minutes. The seas rolled high, and many a man and ship went to the bottom. Government statistics say that on average, 1,033 American World War II veterans are dying every day. That's not surprising. We're all in our 80s and 90s. Our college students and high school students are the forthcoming generation of Americans. America is going to be what you make it. What are you going to do about the massive federal treasury debt that you've inherited? What are you going to do to keep America competitive worldwide? What are you going to do about the millions of illegal aliens pouring through our borders, draining our treasury, adding to the crime list? What are you going to do about the religious zealots that wish to destroy our Constitution and destroy our country? What are you going to do about the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda? And if it's true that 50% of American high school kids do not graduate high school, what are you going to do about this shameful situation? Some say that the greatest generation's time has come and gone, but maybe, just maybe, we might be able to help you before we depart this planet. My name is John Nestor, creator of the documentary Last of the Greatest Generation. Good luck. Goodbye.